The Chronicle off Lady Alara and the Duke off Penrith Prologue. The Penumbra and the Edict the August Earl decreed that his heir must marry a formidable asset, but the Duke, whose life was one of profound loneliness, chose sister relegated to the Penumbra. He chose the one society decreed had no visible worth. The question remains which choice required the greater courage. Hello, lovely. If you are enjoying this Chronicle off intellectual courage and unexpected destiny, I would be so grateful for a simple like or a subscription. It grants me the ability to bring you more stories off love, off longing, and off the profound power off self-discovery. Please tell me in the comments where in the world you are witnessing this tale. Your thoughts are a cherished addition to this community. The gaslit chandeliers off Somerset House's ballroom offered a blinding cascade off golden light. The polished marble floors reflected the august assembly, appearing like a vast polished black lake. London summer 1875 was a city of rigid elegance, but it was a place where social currency was measured in diamonds and beauty and little else. Lady Alara Vane, 25 years of age, sought the discreet shelter off a velvet screen. Her gown was off a somber amethyst, hue chosen for essential visibility, only not for dazzling display, and she carried a copy of a recent treatise on the law of nature. Alara knew her singular contribution to the evening was her quiet, unobtrusive presence, a strategic background that ensured her stepsister's superficial radiance was magnified. She preferred the rigorous intellectual discourse off Canon Adam, Smith finding the perpetual frivolous chatter off the ton to be a taxing intellectual affront. Across the crowded room standing near the grand staircase was the undisputed gravitational core of the entire event. Earl Darren off Sterling, 32 years of age, possessed a terrifying combination of immense inherited wealth and cultivated arrogance. His very posture spoke of unquestioned absolute social dominance. His stepmother, the mesmerizing Lady Isolde Somerset, swept toward Alara with a malicious smile, a viper secreted in burgundy silk. Isolde's voice possessed perfect social projection, carrying just far enough to secure its devastating impact upon the immediate vicinity. Ah, poor Alara, she sighed, her tone dripping with mock pity. One must admire your fortitude in attending, knowing your quietude functions merely as a presence to be excused from our more vibrant social discourse. A ripple off muffled feminine cruelty moved through the nearest social cluster, but Alara's face remained a serene mask off careful neutrality. She had long ago perfected the art off absorbing insults, like stone absorbing rain, silently giving nothing back. Then, voice off careless joviality, off unthinking privilege, cut sharply through the quiet censure. Lord Somerset, the Earl's primary companion, addressed the formidable Darren off Sterling, his voice easily spanning the 15 feet that separated them. Darren, you have gravely neglected your social obligations this evening. Show a small measure of necessary charity. A single waltz with a less celebrated young woman would surely not diminish your celebrated standing, would it now? Alara, who had been meticulously cataloging the architecture of the room, made the profound mistake of meeting the Earl's gaze directly. His cold gray eyes met hers, holding for a terrible moment of clinical arrogant assessment. The consideration was brief, mere second off calculated decision, and then came the profound annihilating dismissal. His words were delivered with the unmistakable clear projection of one whose opinions were undeniable destiny. I only engage in dances that are absolutely proven to augment my social standing, Somerset, not those that serve as testimony to a fundamental deficiency. The Earl stated, his gaze sweeping over Alara with palpable disdain. I possess absolutely no interest in a figure designed by nature to be a mere architectural fixture. The brutal calculated words landed with the weight off a collapsing ceiling. The surrounding social orbit did not cease its trajectory, but it slowed, perceptibly savoring the brutal definitive verdict. Alara felt the collective satisfied confirmation of her utter worthlessness. They expected tears, a humiliating flight, a hysterical surrender to the public pain. Alara offered them nothing of the sort. She placed her untasted glass of claret on a nearby occasional table. She met Lady Isolde's triumphant, viperous gaze for a prolonged instant, observing the casual cruelty that had defined their relationship for years. Then she turned. Her movement was deliberate, her posture unnaturally straight, a silent, rigid act of profound refusal. She walked toward the nearest terrace doors. She did not hurry, nor did she gather her skirts in a frantic retreat. She simply moved with a quiet, rigid dignity. The immense sea of silk and jewels parted slightly to permit her passage, and the whispers followed in her wake like foam trailing a departing ship. The cool, dark night air off London was chilling, shock against the artificial heat off the ballroom. She moved to the stone balustrade and gripped it, fiercely seeking solace in the cold physical solidity off the marble. The vast sky above London was indifferent. Stars glittered with cold beauty, wholly unconcerned with the small, devastating dramas unfolding in the ballrooms below. They seek my annihilation, Alara whispered to the indifferent vastness above her. They shall find instead my self-determination. The humiliation was absolute, but the profound pain was transformed in that instant into a vow of absolute solitary resolve. The crack that formed was not a collapse, but a hairline fracture off the soul, a perfect line off resolution that would eventually spread into a force off irreparable change. The breakfast room off Somerset House received the weak morning light through tall, uncurtained windows. Lady Alara sat at the heavy mahogany table, a cup of cooling tea neglected before her. She had not slept. The events off the previous evening replayed in her mind with the relentless repetition of a musical box wound too tightly, designed by nature to be a mere fixture. The Earl's words should not have carried such devastating weight. She had endured comparable cruelty before, but the sheer casualness of his dismissal, the effortless reduction of her person to unfortunate upholstery, had lodged in her chest like a poisonous splinter. The door opened with the decisive, chilling energy that always announced Lady Isolde before her physical presence appeared. Alara, good. We require immediate discourse. Her stepmother swept in, dressed in a morning gown of deep rose silk, her hair arranged with meticulous perfection, despite the early hour. She settled into the chair directly across from Alara with the profound, satisfied air of someone about to execute a cherished plan. Alara carefully placed her teacup back in its saucer. Good morning, Lady Isolde. I have finalized the necessary arrangements, Isolde announced without a hint of preamble. You are to proceed to Dunbroch, keep in the Isle of Skye indefinitely. The rigorous air off the Scottish Highlands will surely prove beneficial to your constitution, and frankly, your continued presence here has become a profound embarrassment to the family's standing. The words took a moment to penetrate Alara's wary mind. Dunbroch keep? But that property has been entirely abandoned for nearly a decade. It will suit your temperament perfectly. Then Isolde interrupted, her smile sharp as highly polished cut glass. Solitude for the solitary soul. I have already dispatched word to our caretaker to ensure it is aired and made minimally habitable. You will depart in 3 days. Alara stared at her stepmother, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any indication that this was merely a display of casual malice, rather than a genuine calculated plan. She found none. You are executing my banishment. The words emerged flatly, a statement of grim fact, rather than a question. Do not descend into melodrama, Alara. I am providing you with a comfortable, dignified retreat, where you will not be subjected to the rigors of our society that so clearly distresses you. Isolde poured herself tea with movements of studied elegance. After last night's profoundly unfortunate incident, it is patently clear that London is not the proper environment for your particular sensibilities. In Skye you may occupy yourself with whatever simple pleasures suit you, a meditative perusal of books, long vigorous walks, the profound contemplation of nature. The chilling subtext was unmistakable. In Scotland you will be reliably invisible. You will cease to exist in any way that truly matters to my social orbit. And if I elect to refuse, Alara asked, though she already possessed a certain knowledge of the answer. Isolde's eyes hardened with ruthless intent. This residence is a fixture off the Somerset estate, which I administer as your father's widow. You possess a meager independence from your late mother's, trust barely sufficient to sustain you in modest comfort. You may choose to establish yourself in some dingy set-off rooms, in a thoroughly unfashionable quarter, subject to immediate gossip and speculation regarding what scandal drove you from our family home. Or you may accept my generous offer of Dunbroch Keep, where you may reside in comfortable, isolated privacy. It was, Alara recognized with devastating clarity, a trap with absolutely no viable exit. Isolde had planned this maneuver with chilling precision, and last night's humiliation had provided the perfect, indisputable justification. 3 days, Alara repeated softly. 3 days, Isolde confirmed, rising and gliding from the room, leaving behind the heavy scent of expensive perfume and the shattered remnants of Alara's prior life. At White's, the premier gentleman's club, Earl Darren of Stirling sat in a worn leather chair near the fireplace. He held a glass of vintage port, listening to the self-satisfied roar-off conversation swirling around him without any particular interest. Somerset has finally dispatched his plain daughter to Scotland, someone remarked. Darren thought it was Lord Petherton, but he did not bother to confirm the observation. Cannot say I blame him. The girl was a noticeable millstone around the family's social neck. Darren felt a sudden sharp flicker in his chest, a sensation of profound discomfort, perhaps even guilt. He had not consciously thought of the vain girl since the previous evening, or rather he had only allowed himself to think of her briefly in the moment before sleep, when her quiet, composed face had surfaced in his mind, that straight-spined dignity as she walked from the ballroom, not crying, not creating a scene, simply leaving, designed by nature to be a mere fixture. His own casual words, clever, cutting exactly the precise wit that his elite social circle appreciated. Lord Somerset had offered a quick laugh. Others had smiled knowingly. It had been a thoroughly successful rejoinder, the kind that cemented his ironclad reputation for sharp observation and a sharper tongue. But now, seated in the heavy comfort of his club with the port warming his throat, Darren found the memory significantly less satisfying than his pride demanded. She was being forcibly sent away because of his public judgment, or not solely because of him, but because of the rigid society that he represented and tirelessly reinforced. She was leaving because she did not meet the standards of beauty that he had never once questioned, because he had never been forced to question them. He took a deliberate sip of port, willing the unwelcome thought to dissolve. She will find a greater happiness in the Scottish countryside, surely, away from the constant, merciless pressures of society, the perpetual assessments, the brutal social calculus that governs London's ballrooms. Perhaps he mused it was a form of kindness in its own way. Perhaps she would finally find much-needed peace in Skyen. Whatever simple occupations would fill her days. Perhaps I have done her a favor, the Earl thought, constructing a towering rationalization. The fabrication felt thin even as he painstakingly built its logic. But Daranoff Sterling had spent 32 years learning to believe the most comfortable lies about himself and his entitled world. This was simply one more expedient lie. Another port, Your Grace, the attendant inquired quietly. Yes, Darren said, nodding once. And see if Lord Somerset is available. I wish to discuss the impending racing season. Horses political maneuvering the management off his vast estates. These were the proper consequential concerns for our man off his immense station. The fate off one unremarkable girl who could not manage the complex demands of society was unequivocally none of his essential affair. That night, utterly alone in his vast chambers at Stirling House, he saw her face again, gray eyes meeting his across a gleam off marble floor, the brief shattering moment off contact. Before, he dismissed her. Not plain persistent voice whispered. Not plain exactly, but merely unremarkable, utterly forgettable. He repeated this comfortable mantra to himself until the lie regained its necessary conviction. And then he finally slept. The arduous journey to the Isle of Skye consumed 5 consecutive days off travel. With each passing mile, London's soot-stained brittle elegance gave way to a landscape wilder, more profound, and absolutely more honest. Elara watched through the coach window as meticulously manicured parks yielded to rugged rolling countryside. Cultivated gardens surrendered to untamed gorse and thicket, and the heavy air off coal smoke was gradually replaced by the clean, sharp scent off peat and cold earth. Finally, as they approached the northwestern coast, the overwhelming, sharp tang off salt saturated the air. By the 5th day, the landscape had utterly transformed. The road narrowed to little more than a deeply carved track between stone walls winding through a terrain that felt utterly elemental. Here the incessant wind bent the trees into permanent, supplicating submission, and the sky stretched vast, changeable, and perpetually unsettled. When the coach finally crested the last rise and Dunbruch, Keep came into view. Alara's first thought was that the description, Keep, was a profound understatement. The structure was a small, formidable stone fortress 2 stories off, weathered gray granite that appeared to have organically grown from the cliff top rather than been constructed upon it. Its windows were dark, empty eyes staring perpetually out at the furious sea. The garden, if it could be dignified with the name, had long ago been utterly surrendered to nature's rigorous designs, with wild thistle and brambles creating a thorny, impenetrable maze. And beyond it all, the omnipresent sea. Elara heard it before she fully saw it, a constant, profound roar, almost violent in its intensity. Waves crashed against the granite cliffs below with palpable force that seemed determined to pull the very land itself into the depths. This was not the gentle water features off London's parks. This was raw, elemental, and utterly magnificently indifferent to human presence or human suffering. The coach door opened, and a weathered woman in her 60s stood waiting. She wore simple, heavy gray wool and a starched white cap, her face deeply lined by years off coastal winter, eyes sharp and immediately assessing. You will be Lady Elara, then. It was spoken as a statement off fact. I am Mrs. McRae. I have aired out the eastern chamber and laid off fire. Supper will be plain. We possess no staff for fanciful London cuisine. Elara stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after 5 days off travel. Thank you, Mrs. McRae. I am deeply grateful for your preparations. The interior off Dunbroch was clean but profoundly sparse. McRae had clearly done her absolute best, but no amount of frantic dusting could disguise the keep's fundamental emptiness. Minimal furniture, faded curtains that had once been blue, and dark wood floors that echoed with every hesitant footstep. The fire in the drawing room hearth provided welcome warmth, but it only made the shadows in the corners appear deeper. By stark contrast, I will bring your supper to the small dining room in a single hour, Mrs. McRae said. The eastern chamber is up the stairs, the first door to the left. I will ensure your trunk is brought up directly. Then she was gone, her footsteps receding toward the presumptive kitchen, leaving Elara utterly alone in this stark, strange fortress that was now apparently her definitive home. The initial weeks dissolved in a haze of profound, aching isolation. Elara wandered the echoing rooms off Dunbroch like a restless ghost, learning its geometry through constant, painful repetition. The drawing room with its faded chairs, the dining room, where she took solitary meals, the small morning room, overlooking the wild, untamed garden. She attempted to write letters, but they felt hollow. Only one response came, a polite dismissal from a former schoolmate, which confirmed her social annihilation. After that, Elara wrote only in her private journal pages, filled with observations off the sea's changing moods, and catalogued descriptions of her own crushing loneliness, questions without any discernible answers regarding what consequential purpose remained for her life. 3 weeks in her exile, a massive, unrelenting storm struck the coast. Elara stood at her chamber window, watching the nature's violence unfold with a kind of terrible, profound fascination. The wind shrieked around the keep's granite corners, rattling the window panes in their frames. Rain fell in sheets so thick the garden disappeared into gray, aqueous nothing. And the sea transformed into something monstrous, elemental, truly terrifying. as she watched something in Alara finally cracked. Not broke, for she had thought herself entirely broken already, but cracked like thick dense ice yielding to spring thaw. I am entirely alone, she thought. The cold stark realization struck her with the brute force off those colossal waves. Truly completely alone. No one is coming to execute my rescue. I am utterly and profoundly forgotten. The realization should have been devastating. Instead it delivered strange undeniable clarity. And then quieter yet far more powerful thought emerged. Then I am entirely free. Free from the immense suffocating. You are beginning to appear less like revenant, and more like person with palpable purpose, Mrs. McCrae observed a week later, setting down Alara's simple breakfast with a small nod of approval. Alara, who had brought 2 heavy philosophical texts to the table, looked up with slight surprise. Am I indeed, Mrs. McCrae? That you are? A touch of genuine color in your cheeks, too. The disciplined walking helps, I expect. The rigorous walking had quickly become a daily intellectual necessity. Alara began venturing beyond Dunbrock's immediate grounds, following the treacherous cliff paths toward the remote village off Penrith. 2 miles distant, the physical exertion cleared her mind. The village, small and profoundly unpretentious, offered a potent glimpse of existence utterly different from anything she had previously known in London. In her solitary self-directed study, she methodically devoured the keep's hidden library, applying the merciless logic of her reading to her shattered life. She consumed mill on liberty, recognizing the profound irony that her ultimate freedom had been granted by a decree of absolute banishment. Meanwhile, in London, 6 months after Alara's exile, Earl Darren of Stirling attended a ballroom assembly. It was virtually identical to the countless others of the season. Gaslit splendor, beautiful women in exquisite gowns, conversation that glittered without possessing any substantive worth. Darren moved through the familiar practiced choreography with a sense of profound disconnection. Across the vast ballroom, a young woman in muted mauve momentarily arrested his attention. For a single sharp heartbeat, his breath caught. But no, it was someone else entirely. Miss something or other whose face bore no resemblance to whose. You have been damnably dull off late, Darren, Lord Somerset noted, materializing at his elbow with a glass of champagne and a look of feigned concern. What profound matter consumes your magnificent thoughts? Nothing of consequence, Darren replied smoothly. Political concerns, estate management. Bollocks, Somerset declared cheerfully. You have been profoundly distracted for months. If I were not privy to your impeccable character, I would venture to suggest you were experiencing pining off sorts. Do not be entirely absurd, Darren snapped. But that night, utterly alone in his vast chambers at Stirling House, he stood at the window overlooking the indifferent expanse of London. He wondered why his monumental success felt profoundly empty, why every professional accomplishment seemed only to emphasize profound hollow core at the center of his existence. He poured a generous measure of port and told himself he was merely suffering from protracted ennui. He did not permit himself to think of gray eyes or quiet dignity or the brutal thoughtless words he now wished he could forcibly recall. Ally. Her name was Alara, Lady Alara Vane. He remembered it with terrifying perfect clarity. The first anonymous investment. It was at this time that the first anonymous donation arrived at the small struggling Anglican parish in Penrith, Cornwall. £200 sterling, an immense staggering sum for the remote coastal community. It was sent via a private London solicitor. The instructions stipulated that the funds were to be used entirely at the vicar's discretion, solely for the benefit of local charitable endeavors. The donor remained stubbornly anonymous. For the next 3 years, these significant donations arrived with unwavering quarterly consistency. The Self-Determination Project in Cornwall. As the profound isolation continued, Alara began venturing further. It was on one of these invigorating walks a year in her exile that she entered the modest local church, seeking simple shelter from a sudden, unexpected downpour. She found herself examining the small, pitiful library 2 shelves off, severely worn religious texts. Not a vast selection, I am afraid, Mrs. Alcott, the vicar's wife, said, emerging from the vestry with a warm, genuine smile. You must be Lady Alara. McCrae mentioned you had taken Dunbroch. Welcome to Penrith. Alcott, a woman of palpable kindness, hesitated, then spoke with a carefully practiced boldness. Forgive me for my directness, but several young village girls are acutely eager to master their letters. Our resources are limited. She gestured toward the worn primers. Would you perhaps consent to offer your services? Even a single hour per week would prove utterly transformative for them. Alara's initial instinct was to instantly refuse. She possessed no formal training, but then she considered the profound raw hunger for knowledge that had awakened in her own soul. She thought of the liberating ideas housed in Dunbrock's hidden library. I have no prior training, she said slowly. Nor had I when I commenced, Mrs. Alcott replied. But I have found that a willing student and a patient teacher can achieve utterly remarkable things together. Then yes, Alara consented. I shall certainly attempt it. The following Sunday, 6 girls ranging from 8 to 14 years of age gathered in the church vestry regarding Alara with a mixture of shyness and complete reverence. A real lady, one whispered. Alara, who had never felt particularly real, smiled with surprising certainty. She had no formal pedagogy, but she possessed books' patience and a sudden fierce desire to give these girls the singular gift that London had refused to give her, the profound sense that they absolutely mattered. She began with the alphabet transforming the task into a compelling game. She taught them to write their own names, watching their faces, illuminate as they saw their own identities, take legible shape on the slate. When young Sarah, 9 years old, struggled profoundly, Alara did not scold. Instead, she said, gently, learning is a profound secret code. Once you master it the entirety off, the world opens to your grasp. Like magic, Sarah whispered. Exactly like our magic, Alara confirmed. And watching the girl's face transform, with understanding, Alara laughed genuinely freely, for the very first time, since the devastating ballroom assembly. 6 months after Alara commenced her teaching, her Sunday lessons expanded to twice weekly. Alcott noted that women in neighboring villages had heard of the lady who teaches letters. More students rapidly appeared. Alara's small, inadequate allowance from her father's trust rapidly stretched impossibly thin. As she purchased essential books and supplies, she began the deliberate process of selling her remaining London gowns, those elaborate confections that had never genuinely suited her temperament anyway. A seamstress in the nearby market town offered her decent prices, clearly puzzled why a lady would part with such costly finery. Alara used every single penny to procure primers, slates, and paper. Every coin became a direct investment in minds intensely hungry for knowledge. The artist emerges 2 years in her exile before the school had fully blossomed. Alara discovered a profound latent talent for painting. It began as pure therapy. Long solitary afternoons threatened to drive her to distraction, so she procured watercolors and paper from the village shop, attempting to capture the desolate beauty off Cornwall's dramatic landscapes. She possessed no formal training, only rigorous observation, and a desperate aching need to create something beautiful from the wreckage of her isolation. Her early work was tentative, but gradually her focus shifted. She began painting the people off Penrith, the fishwife with a face weathered by wind but with eyes that held profound genuine kindness, the midwife whose capable hands were folded in her lap, women of undeniable worth whom society never deemed worthy of portraiture. She eventually titled this collection Unseen Portraits, a body of work that relentlessly insisted on visibility for those the world habitually overlooked. The shadowy benefactor, meanwhile, in London, Darren Sterling, received a private formal report every quarter. The investigator's prose was cold, detached, but the details were meticulously observed. Subject remains at Dunbruch Keep. Subject has initiated rudimentary literacy lessons for local women. Darren would read the reports, his chest tightening, with a complex mixture of relief and agonizing guilt. He initiated the anonymous quarterly donations of £500, Sterling an immense sum sent via his solicitor to the Penrith parish, stipulating the funds be directed toward educational charity work. He possessed no right to approach her, but he was utterly incapable of doing nothing. 5 years off banishment passed. Alara stood before the keep's single full-length mirror. The same light brown hair, the same gray, blue eyes, the same utterly unremarkable features that London society had so easily dismissed. But as she studied her reflection, she recognized a profound change. Not in her physical appearance, but in the way she profoundly inhabited her own skin. They decreed I was utterly forgettable, she whispered to her reflection. Perhaps I was, because I believed their cruel judgment, because I made myself small. But what if I ceased the exhausting labor off trying to be what they demanded and become something entirely off my own making? The choice crystallized with powerful clarity. She would stay not as a passive exile enduring banishment, but as a woman forcefully claiming her own life. She would expand her school, transform her existence into something that genuinely mattered. 6 years after Alara's banishment, Earl Darren Sterling attended another of the perpetual hollow London assemblies. It was identical to the thousands of others. He moved through the familiar choreography with a wary, practiced ease. It should have been profoundly satisfying. This was, after all, his undisputed world. Instead, it felt intensely hollow. You are damnably restless, Blackwell Lord, Somerset observed, using Darren's title off his other dukedom, appearing at his elbow with a sharp, questioning look. What acute malady afflicts you? Nothing of consequence, Darren lied smoothly. Merely a restlessness of the soul. Bollocks, Henry retorted. You are perpetually distracted. If I were not cognizant of your impeccable character, I would venture to suggest you were deeply pining for a lost love. Do not be absurd, Darren snapped. But that night, utterly alone in his vast chambers, he stood at the window overlooking London. He questioned why success felt like a catastrophic failure, why every accomplishment only amplified the emptiness at his core. He poured port, telling himself he was simply suffering from existential ennui. He did not permit himself to think off gray blue eyes or quiet dignity. In a locked desk drawer, Darren possessed a cache of documents, quarterly reports from the private investigator, chronicling every detail of Alara's welfare, newspaper clippings, detailing the expansion of Steed, Morwen's school, and copies of the immense bank drafts, sent anonymously to fund her work. The most recent investigator's report lay at the very top of the pile. Subject continues educational work with apparent success. School enrollment has expanded significantly. Local community holds her in high regard. Note: subject will return to London on June the 2nd for Father's Memorial Service. will remain approximately 1 week at Somerset House, dare and read that final devastating paragraph, perhaps 50 times. She was coming back after 7 long years. The prospect filled him with profound acute fear. What could he possibly say to her? How could he possibly explain 7 years off silent, observation anonymous donations and carefully maintained distance? He was utterly catastrophically unprepared for his final reckoning. 7 years had transformed Dunbrach Keep. The wild garden had been meticulously tamed into a productive enterprise. The keep had been modestly expanded, small wing added, with the invaluable assistance of local craftsmen, whose daughters attended Elera's school. What had begun as literacy lessons had blossomed into the Solstice Academy, a formidable institution dedicated to the teaching of applied philosophy and applied arithmetic. Elera wore simple clothing, now her hair styled loosely, exhibiting the quiet, powerful authority of someone who had definitively discovered her intrinsic worth and no longer required any form of external validation. "You are transforming them, you know, Mrs. Alcott declared one morning, handing Elera a copy of the Glasgow Herald. "Mary Pascoe's daughter now manages the accounts for the local fishery. Your education transforms their very destiny." Elera scanned the article. "Lady Elera Vane's innovative pedagogical methods elevate the minds of the Highlands working women. Solstice Academy stands as a powerful testament to what can be accomplished when vision meets relentless dedication." Regional fame was no longer sufficient to describe her impact. Speaking of recognition, Elera noted, changing the subject, another donation arrived yesterday. £500, the same sum as always. No name but a London postmark. She had wondered about the anonymous donor for years, but she was utterly unable to deny the profound positive impact of the secret funds. The letter requesting her attendance at her father's memorial service arrived with a simple request for her presence. As the sole surviving child, it was accompanied by a second note from Lady Isolde: "Your attendance is absolutely expected for propriety's sake. Do try not to occasion further embarrassment to our family standing." The decision was no longer a source of agonizing uncertainty. Going to London was not a submission. It was a necessary final act of self-validation. Elera would return to prove to herself, more than anyone else, that society's past judgment no longer possessed any power to define her present existence. She would not return as the banished girl. She would return as the founder of the Solstice Academy. Aid off expectations she could never possibly meet. Free from the constant merciless assessment of eyes that found her perpetually wanting. Free from the exhausting lifelong work of trying to make herself small, acceptable, and utterly invisible. Here in this isolated keep on the very edge of the civilized world, no one was watching. No one truly cared whether she was plain or stunning proper, or scandalous worthy or worthless. She possessed the autonomy to be anything or nothing at all. The ultimate choice was now entirely terrifyingly hers. The realization settled over her like a powerful benediction. The following morning, restless and seeking profound distraction, Elera explored parts of Dunbrach she had previously elected to ignore. In a corner room on the second floor, behind a door she had incorrectly assumed led to a storage closet, she discovered a small private study. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light from a tall window. A heavy desk sat beneath the light, and 3 walls were lined with meticulously stacked bookshelves. Unlike the meager collection in the main library, these shelves were utterly full, perhaps 200 diverse volumes. Their spines bore titles that made Elera's breath catch, sharply: A Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft, Darwin's On the Origin of Species, Mill's on Liberty, political treatises that would have instantly scandalized any London drawing room. Some previous discerning inhabitant of Dunbrach had been a genuinely radical thinker, and they had left their immense intellectual treasures behind. Elera pulled down the Wollstonecraft and opened to our random page. "I do not wish women to have power over men but over themselves," she read, standing upright too, absorbed to seek a seat. Then she carried the heavy book downstairs and read through supper, barely registering the simple taste of Mrs. McCrae's fish stew. She read by the dancing firelight until the dense words blurred, and when she finally collapsed into sleep, her dreams were filled with philosophical ideas, not with glittering hollow ballrooms. The final truth was undeniable: her true life had just begun. The final miles off the long journey into London assailed Lady Elera's acute senses with a physical shocking violence. Scotland's clean coastal air yielded immediately to the acrid, pervasive smell of coal smoke, thick enough to distinctly taste. Open landscapes, wide fields, and the endless sea compressed into cramped, suffocating streets lined with tall, oppressive buildings that ruthlessly blocked out the sun. The silence she had grown profoundly accustomed to, broken only by wind and the majestic roar of the waves, surrendered entirely to a jarring cacophony. Vendors shouting, carriage wheels clattering on relentless cobblestones, the constant suffocating press of humanity creating a deafening, tangible wall of noise. After 7 years off voluntary exile, London felt entirely like a foreign, profoundly hostile country. Elera watched through the coach window with newly critical eyes. The ostentatious vulgar wealth on unabashed display, fine carriages, elaborate shop fronts, women dripping with extravagant jewels, existed alongside a desperate, visible poverty she had somehow failed to perceive before her banishment. Beggars huddled in cold doorways. Children with hollow eyes sold matches on every corner. The contrast was utterly obscene, and she questioned how she had ever accepted it as a natural inevitable order. When the coach finally stopped before Somerset House, Alara felt none of the deep intimidation that had once characterized her entire relationship with this place. The elegant Georgian faade looked exactly as she had left it, impeccably maintained, speaking off old money and older rigid pride, but where it once seemed imposingly grand now, it simply struck her as intensely small. The butler, man of characteristic formality, opened the door. His eyes flickered over Alara without immediate recognition, then widened sharply. "Lady Alara, welcome to your London residence," he stated. The word residence landed awkwardly. This had never been a home merely, a place she had inhabited while passively waiting to be deemed marginally acceptable for some other destination. "Thank you," Alara replied with perfect composure. She was led not to her old chamber, the small, neglected room on the 3rd floor where she had spent her quiet girlhood, but to a large, impersonal guest room on the 2nd floor. The subtle message was painfully clear. She was a mere visitor now, not a true resident. The distinction did not wound her, as Isolde had doubtless intended. If anything, it reinforced what Alara already profoundly knew. She did not belong here anymore. She had elsewhere to belong. Dinner was served in the formal ornate dining room at precisely 8 hours 00 minutes. The vast table, absurdly large, for 2 people, gleamed mercilessly with silver and crystal. A complex, elaborate meal appeared course by course. It was the kind of ostentatious, excessive display that London society considered normal, and that now struck Alara as deeply grotesque. Lady Isolde sat at the head of the table in magnificent black mourning silk that somehow made her appear more vibrant, rather than less. At 45 years of age, she remained beautiful in the way of expensive, carefully maintained things, her skin preserved through costly creams, her figure severely corseted into a fashionable shape, her hair arranged with meticulous, perfect art. Her eyes swept over Alara with an initial assessment that could not entirely conceal a distinct element of surprise. Whatever she had anticipated, a broken creature diminished by her protracted exile, this self-possessed woman was clearly not it. "How lamentably provincial your current aesthetic has become." Alara Isolde began, her voice carrying the particular cloying sweetness that was always the prelude to her cruelty. "That dress is certainly simplistic. I suppose Scottish standards radically differ from civilized society's expectations." 7 years ago, the comment would have forced Alara to shrink visibly into herself. Now she merely offered a calm, steady smile and took a deliberate sip of wine. "Scottish standards value substance over ornamentation," she replied, her voice measured. "I found the change profoundly refreshing." Isolde's fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, as if the established script she had used for years no longer possessed any relevant application. "Well," she said, recovering with immediate, ruthless speed, "I suppose 7 years of profound isolation would inevitably imbue one with a number of peculiar notions regarding propriety." 7 years of purpose, Alara corrected gently, allowing the implicit challenge to stand. "I have been quite purposefully occupied with the foundation of my academy." "Ah, yes, your little educational experiment." How quaint. Isolde dismissed the notion with a casual flick off the wrist. Alara let the final dismissal pass without providing any response. Engaging with Isolde's barbs granted them unnecessary power. Silence rendered them perfectly impotent. Finally, Isolde spoke again, her tone one of studied casualness. "The memorial service is in 2 days, Tuesday at 11 hours 00 minutes. You are entirely expected to attend. Naturally, you understand that public addresses from women are deemed thoroughly unseemly. The vicar will deliver the sole eulogy. If the vicar formally requests my participation, I shall honor father's memory as I see fit," Alara said quietly, maintaining eye contact. Isolde's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You have become quite bold in your isolation. I have become honest. There is a demonstrable difference. Longer this time." Then Isolde continued with theatrical casualness. "Everyone of social importance will attend, of course. The Thornburys, the Ashfords, Lord Henry Somerset, and his new wife. Even the formidable Earl Darren of Stirling has confirmed his definite attendance." Alara's fingers tightened momentarily on her wine glass. Her breathing paused just for a precise heartbeat. Then her composure returned smooth and impenetrable as glass covering profoundly troubled water. "I perceive," she said. Isolde smiled, satisfied at having landed a sharp, stinging blow. "I thought you should be adequately prepared. It would prove profoundly unfortunate if you were overcome by unexpected, regrettable encounters." "How deeply thoughtful of you to express such concern," Alara stated, her sarcasm subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. Isolde heard it. Her mouth thinned into a barely contained line of anger. "You may excuse yourself, Alara. I find I have suddenly lost my appetite." Alara rose with innate grace, offered a slight polite nod, and left the dining room without uttering a single word. But that night, utterly alone in the guest room with London's persistent noise drifting through her window, her calm faade finally cracked, just slightly. She would see him again. Earl Darren of Stirling, the man whose casual cruelty had orchestrated her banishment, whose devastating words had confirmed every fear she had ever harbored about her intrinsic worth. Did it still inflict pain? She probed the memory carefully, like testing a wound that had supposedly healed. There was a tenderness, yes, the persistent ghost of old pain. But the sharp, hemorrhaging agony had scabbed over, scarred, become something she had definitively survived. Rather than something that profoundly defined her, she could face him. She would face him. His opinion, whatever it might be, no longer possessed the power to entirely destroy her. The following morning, Lady Isolde insisted that they visit a renowned dress shop for proper morning attire. You cannot possibly attend the Memorial Inn, that provincial linen, she declared over breakfast. Whatever Scotland's standards, London has rigid expectations. Ilara consented primarily because it offered her a viable excuse to escape the stifling atmosphere off Somerset House. The shop, located in a particularly elegant sector off Mayfair, was a palace off gilt mirrors and plush carpets with gowns displayed like invaluable works of art. They were examining severe black silks when familiar voices made Ilara's spine stiffen slightly. Such a genuine tragedy about the former Earl Somerset, Lady Thornbury was saying to her daughter as they entered the fitting area. I understood he possessed a daughter, but she completely vanished years ago. Scandal off some sort, I believe. Ilara turned slowly. They did not recognize her at first. Their eyes slid right past her, as they would pass any genuinely unremarkable person. Isolde's smile was palpably malicious with pleasure. Allow me to formally reintroduce my stepdaughter, Lady Ilara. The women's eyes widened in perfect, immediate synchronization. They searched Ilara's face for the plain girl. They remembered but found someone profoundly different. Not physically transformed, but fundamentally different in her presence, in the steady composure of her gaze. Lady Ilara, Lady Thornbury, recovered first, her voice pitched high with false warmth. My goodness, we had absolutely no idea. That is, we had not quite realized that I still existed. Ilara supplied helpfully. How lamentably provincial you have become, Cecilia, the daughter cut in, with the casual cruelty she had perfected. The Highlands must have agreed with you in its simple way. Ilara smiled, genuinely amused by the predictability. The Highlands taught me that intrinsic value is far less interesting than palpable purpose, she replied. I have been quite profoundly fulfilled. Cecilia's perfect features arranged themselves into confusion. Ilara's response did not fit the expected script. No defensiveness, no wounded pride, no desperate attempt to prove herself worthy of notice. They departed with indecent haste, leaving Isolde frustrated and Ilara oddly satisfied. Later that afternoon, Ilara escaped Somerset House, desperate for clean air and true solitude. She found herself drawn by muscle memory to Hatchard's bookshop. She wandered the philosophy section, running her fingers along the familiar spines, feeling a comforting easing in her chest. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with a tall, impeccably dressed figure reaching for the exact same volume. She had intended to select Mills. They both froze instantly. Earl Darren of Stirling stood before her in charcoal gray, looking exactly, and yet entirely nothing like she remembered. The same cold gray eyes, the same aristocratic bearing, but something had irrevocably changed in his countenance. Lines that had not existed before, a haunted, visceral quality around his mouth. Their hands hovered over the same book, not quite touching. Lady Ilara, he said, his voice rough with shock. Your Grace? Silence expanded between them, profound and charged. He swallowed visibly. I heard of your father's passing. My deepest condolences. Thank you. Ilara took the Mill volume from the shelf, their fingers coming within inches off contact. I believe I reached it first. Of course, please. He stepped back, giving her space. More silence. She could see him struggling, words forming and dying on his lips. I understand you have been in the Highlands. I sincerely hope. I hope your time there was not entirely unpleasant. The Highlands have been transformative, Your Grace. Ilara said, her voice meticulously measured and calm. I discovered a definitive purpose there that London never offered me. She watched him absorb the implicit critique. She saw him recognize the full measure of it and flinch from its impact. He wanted to utter more. She could see it in the way his hands clenched at his sides, in the desperation flickering across his composed features. He wanted to confess everything, but standing before her actual, formidable presence, words utterly failed him. I am genuinely glad to hear it, he said finally, a profoundly pathetic, cowardly statement. She saw him recognize this even as the words left his mouth. Ilara studied him with calm, complete assessment, and he seemed to visibly shrink under her steady gaze, despite his superior height. There was something genuinely broken in him, something that had perhaps always been there, but was now utterly visible. She felt a surprising, unexpected pity. If you will excuse me, she said finally. I possess much to prepare before the memorial. She nodded politely, purchased her book, and left. Darren stood immobile among the shelves, watching her go, having failed catastrophically at his first encounter in 7 years. Ilara walked rather than taking a carriage, needing the physical movement to fully process the complex, roiling emotions the encounter had unleashed. Seeing him again had affected her more than expected, but not with pain. Not anymore. What she felt was far more complex: surprise at his haunted appearance, curiosity regarding what had transpired with him in 7 years, and yes, that undeniable, unexpected pity. He appeared like a man intensely pursued by his own ghosts. But whatever torments afflicted Earl Darren of Stirling, they were his alone to carry. She had returned to London to face her past. She would not permit him to derail that profound purpose. By the time she reached Somerset House, her composure had returned solid as granite. At Stirling House, Darren dismissed his valet and poured a generous glass of whiskey with trembling hands. The undeniable truth was now utterly inescapable. She was not plain. She had never been plain. He had been blind, arrogant, and cruel beyond measure, and now she had returned as woman, off undeniable, substance off tangible, purpose off, quiet, formidable strength, while he remained exactly what he had always been, hollow title in, expensive clothing. A man who had accomplished nothing off, true lasting consequence. He could not possibly permit her to leave London without truly speaking to her, without attempting genuine amends. Even if she rejected him, when she rejected him, he had to try. He sat at his desk and drafted a personal letter requesting a private audience. 5 versions later, they all sounded self-serving, intensely manipulative, and desperate. He burned them all, watching the carefully chosen words turn to ash. The night before the memorial, Alara stood at her window, overlooking London's glittering cruel lights. Tomorrow she would face the entirety of the society that had dismissed her. Tomorrow she would eulogize our father, who had never once defended her. She felt no fear, only a quiet, powerful determination. Let them see what they discarded, she whispered to the indifferent city. Let them wonder what they entirely missed, and let them finally realize far too late that their opinion never mattered at all. Across London in his own study, Darren stared at the same indifferent sky. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing, not to Alara but to his solicitor. I wish to make a public donation to the Solstice Academy for women in the Isle of Skye Inn, the immediate amount of £1,000. The donation is to be formally attributed to me personally, with my full and explicit support and endorsement of Lady Alara Vane's educational work made clearly known. If she would not accept his desperate words, perhaps she would be forced to acknowledge his decisive actions. It was beginning, however, inadequate, and Earl Darren of Stirling was suddenly, acutely running out of precious time. The morning of the memorial dawned grey, and heavily threatening clouds hanging low over London, like a widow's somber veil. James Church on Piccadilly began filling early with the highest echelons of society. Lords and ladies in elegant black arrived in polished carriages, ostensibly to pay final respects to a man most had barely known but whose funeral represented a paramount social obligation they dared not ignore. In the guest room at Somerset House, Alara dressed with meticulous careful deliberation. Her black silk gown was the sole concession to London fashion. She had made commission from a local Skye seamstress, but acknowledging the city's mourning conventions. It fit her perfectly elegant in its profound simplicity, speaking of respect without any hint of ostentation. Macrae, who had insisted on accompanying Alara to London, helped arrange her hair. The older woman's weathered hands were surprisingly delicate, pulling Alara's dark brown locks into a simple style that was elegant precisely because it did not strive too hard. It was pulled back to reveal her face, rather than attempting to hide it. Hold your head high, Mrs. Macrae said softly, meeting Alara's eyes in the mirror. You possess nothing for which to be ashamed, and they possess much to definitively answer for. Alara smiled at her reflection. She saw not the uncertain girl who had been banished 7 years ago, but a woman who profoundly knew her own intrinsic worth. The arrival at James Church was a meticulously choreographed spectacle, designed for maximum social impact. Lady Isolde, resplendent in black bombazine, with glittering jet beading, descended from the carriage first. Then Alara, her hand steady as she accepted the footman's assistance. They walked up the church steps together. Propriety demanded the appearance of familial unity, and whispers instantly rippled through the assembled mourners, like wind through tall wheat. Is that truly the Vane girl? She looks so profoundly different. No, wait. She looks essentially the same, but somehow she possesses a notable presence now. Alara heard every single word. 7 years ago they would have utterly destroyed her. Now they simply confirmed what she already knew. London society remained precisely as shallow as she remembered. She kept her spine straight, her expression composed, and followed Isolde down the aisle to the front pew reserved entirely for family. Darren had arrived deliberately early, positioning himself toward the back of the church, partially obscured by a large pillar. He told himself he was there to pay respects to the former earl. Man, he had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with Total. The lie was transparent. He was there to see her. When Alara entered, he catalogued every detail with the desperate minute attention of a drowning man grasping at flotsam. The straight spine that spoke off inner strength, the quiet dignity in her movements, the way she did not flinch under society's scrutiny, did not shrink or apologize for occupying space. She had become magnificent. Blackwell, Lord Henry's voice made him violently start. Did not expect to find you lurking in the shadows. That is not your customary style. Darren turned to find his friend, regarding him with knowing eyes. Simply arrived early. Henry's gaze followed Darren's to where Alara sat in the front pew. That is the Vane girl, is it not? I barely recognize her. She possesses quite a tangible presence about her now. Does she? Darren said flatly. You noticed it too then? Interesting. Henry settled into the pew beside him. This should be an acutely intriguing service. He had no idea how profoundly correct he was. The service began with traditional somber elements. The vicar's eulogy emphasizing the earl's largely fabricated virtues. Hymn sung by a congregation that had never genuinely known the deceased. Darren sat frozen, utterly unable to take his eyes off Alara. Then the vicar announced the late earl's daughter, Lady Alara, has formally prepared some words of remembrance. Isolde's head instantly whipped toward Alara. Shock poorly concealed her hands, shooting out to grasp Alara's wrist. Her whisper was urgent and entirely audible. You cannot possibly. It is utterly inappropriate. Women do not speak at a funeral. Alara gently but firmly removed Isolde's hand from her arm. Without uttering a single word, she rose and moved to the lectern with calm, absolute purpose. The entire congregation shifted, uncertain. This was irregular, unseemly. Women did not deliver eulogies, did not address assemblies, did not publicly claim a voice in matters of consequence. Alara stood before them all, before the entirety of London society, and began to speak. My father was not a perfect man, she said, her voice clear and unnervingly steady. I do not stand before you to claim otherwise. A ripple of shock moved audibly through the church. Society eulogies were intended to be glowing fabrications. Honesty was nearly scandalous. He was a man of his time and class. Alara continued with all the inherent limitations that implies. He taught me, though perhaps not in the manner He intended that worth must be self-determined, not passively assigned by others. Darren's hands gripped the pew front until his knuckles went stark white. I learned from his absence to value palpable presence. Elara said, her eyes calmly scanning the congregation from his silence, to value public voice from his inability to see me clearly, to see myself with absolute clarity. Every word felt profoundly aimed at Darren personally. Though she never once looked in his direction, he desperately wanted to stand up to shout that he understood, that he saw her now, that he had been catastrophically wrong. He remained utterly frozen. But I also learned that exile can be education. Elara's voice softened slightly. That dismissal can be freedom, that being utterly forgotten by society can truly mean being intensely remembered by oneself. Her gaze swept across the assembled elite, touching briefly on faces that had mocked her, dismissed her, found her unworthy of notice. Many of you have not thought of me in years. I suspect some do not remember me at all. A small, almost humorous smile touched her lips. I assure you the feeling is mutual. Somewhere in the middle pews, Lady Thornbury made a small sound off genuine outrage. My father gave me life, Elara concluded, and for that I remain grateful. What I have done with that life has been entirely my own creation. I hope in his own way he might have been quietly proud of the woman his daughter became, not despite his neglect, but because of my fundamental refusal to be defined by it. She returned to her seat. The silence was so complete that the rustle off her skirt seemed deafening. The vicar, clearly uncertain how to proceed after such a profound, unprecedented address, cleared his throat and moved hurriedly into the closing prayers. After the service, a receiving line formed outside the church, a social ritual as meticulously choreographed as a ballet. Elara stood with eye-souled, accepting condolences with a profound grace that most attendees found unsettling, precisely because it was wholly genuine rather than merely performed. So sorry for your loss, my dear Lady Pitton, gushed her eyes sharp with curiosity. And we are all simply fascinated by your little academy endeavor. How quaint. Educational empowerment for women is many things, Lady Pitton, Elara replied with a steady smile. Quaint is not demonstrably among them. Lady Pitton blinked, uncertain whether she had been subtly insulted. Cecilia Thornbury approached with her mother, both wearing expressions of poorly concealed disdain. You have become quite bold, Elara, Cecilia said. The Highlands have made you rather outspoken. The Highlands did not make me anything, Cecilia, Elara responded calmly. They simply removed the impediments to becoming myself. The younger woman's mouth opened then closed. She possessed no response to someone who fundamentally refused to play by the established rules of social combat. As the crowd thinned, Elara saw him approaching. Darren moved through the dispersing mourners with the careful, measured determination of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still felt entirely unprepared. McCrae had stepped away to speak with the vicar. Elara stood utterly alone on the church steps, and she did not flee. She simply waited with that quiet composure that Darren was beginning to recognize as her greatest strength. Lady Elara, his voice came out rougher than intended. Your words today were profoundly remarkable. Were they? She tilted her head slightly. I simply spoke honestly. Perhaps that is what makes them remarkable in this context. The gentle, devastating barb landed precisely where she had aimed it. Darren flinched. I deserve that. Did you? Elara's expression remain neutral. I was not actively thinking of you when I spoke, your grace. That hurt Darren worse than any deliberate cruelty could have. He pushed forward, desperate to utter something that mattered. I wanted to tell you. I have thought about. I owe you a debt. Your grace, Elara interrupted gently. Whatever debt you believe you owe me, I release you from it. I hold no personal grudge against you. But you should, Darren said, desperation now creeping into his voice. I was unconscionably cruel. I stood by while you were publicly humiliated, banished, treated. As yes, Elara agreed simply. You were, and yes, you did. But my profound healing cannot come from your guilt, nor my lasting peace from your apology. I have constructed a life I am genuinely proud of. What you did or failed to do 7 years ago no longer possesses power over my being. Darren felt something essential break inside his chest. It possesses power over me, he whispered. Every day, I cannot escape what I have done. For the first time in the conversation, Elara truly looked at him, her gray blue eyes searching his face with a palpable assessment. What she saw made her voice soften slightly. Then perhaps you should examine why you committed the act, your grace, not for my benefit, but for your own ultimate resolution. Before he could respond, a familiar poisonous voice interrupted. Your grace, how profoundly kind of you to attend. Lady Isolde appeared with perfectly timed malice. Elara, we must not monopolize the Duke's time with our provincial concerns. Darren surprised himself by immediately responding with force. Lady Elara's concerns are anything but provincial, Lady Isolde. Her educational work in the Highlands has garnered significant legitimate respect. Isolde's expression flickered with absolute shock. The Earl of Stirling, defending her dismissed stepdaughter, was entirely outside the established script. If you will both excuse me, Elara said calmly. I possess appointments to keep. She nodded politely and descended the church steps toward waiting carriage, leaving Darren standing beside stunned Isolde. That evening in her room at Somerset House, Elara wrote to Mrs. Alcott, London is precisely as I left it, simultaneously beautiful and hollow. The memorial service is complete. I spoke honestly about father, and I find myself profoundly grateful for my real life far from here. For students who value learning over fashion, for purpose over position, I will return home soon. Across London, Darren had already confessed everything to his solicitor, revealing the 7 years off secret penance. He could not permit her to leave London without understanding, without seeing that he was capable of genuine, profound change, not through futile words, but through decisive actions. His immediate action was public. His solicitor was instructed to immediately attribute the £1,000 donation to the Solstice Academy to Earl Darren of Stirling personally, with his full explicit support and endorsement of Lady Elara Vane's educational work. Made known to the press. The arrival the very next afternoon, Elara received a note from a footman. It contained an immense surprise. Lady Elara, a man's voice greeted her as she was led into a smaller salon. He was tall, handsome, perhaps 42 years of age, dressed in impeccably tailored French fashion. His warm brown eyes found Elara immediately, and his face lit with genuine, unconcealed pleasure. Monsieur Etienne Duclos, Elara said, offering a genuine smile. What a delightful surprise. I did not expect to find you in London. I had the great pleasure of meeting Lady Elara 3 months ago in Exeter. Etienne said smoothly, his French accent lending a certain weight to his perfect English. At the gallery exhibition of her remarkable unseen portraits. He turned to Elara, his attention complete and profoundly flattering. I have journeyed to London specifically to propose that you exhibit your series here in a proper metropolitan gallery. Your work deserves international recognition. That is genuinely kind, Elara replied. But I have also come, Etienne continued, his voice dropping to a far more intimate register, if I may be bold, to continue our conversation regarding my other far more profound proposal. Elara felt a sudden heat rise to her cheeks. Etienne Duclos had previously suggested that Elara consider expanding the Solstice Academy's reach to France. He had offered to help establish sister institutions in Paris and Lyon. Lady Elara's vision for women's education is entirely revolutionary, Etienne explained to the empty room, his admiration utterly obvious. I have been attempting to persuade her that the Highlands, while charming, severely limits her potential global impact. Imagine what she could accomplish with proper resources and reach. For the first time, Darren, who had entered the room, unannounced, confronted something worse than Elara's indifference. The very real possibility of losing her to someone else, to a man who instantly valued what Darren had so carelessly failed to see. Monsieur Duclos, Darren interjected, his voice strained. I appreciate your confidence. But I believe Lady Elara has had a difficult few days. Perhaps she requires rest rather than demanding social engagements. Elara's eyes instantly cooled as she turned toward Darren. I am entirely capable of managing my own schedule, Your Grace. The contrast was devastating. Etienne's uncomplicated, genuine respect for Elara as an intellectual equal stood in sharp relief against Darren's complex, agonizing history of dismissal. I would be delighted to join you for dinner, Monsieur Duclos, Elara said, sealing the matter. Shall we say 7 hours 00 minutes? Perfect. Etienne bowed. Until this evening, then. Darren watched him depart, leaving a charged silence in his wake. You are dining with him. Darren's control was slipping entirely. You have known him only 3 months. Yes, Elara's voice was crisp. And in those 3 months, he has demonstrated more genuine interest in my work and ideas than London society has shown in my entire life. He does not know you. Not truly. Neither do you, Darren. You knew me for perhaps 20 minutes 7 years ago. Judge me in 10 seconds, and have spent the intervening time merely watching from a deliberate distance. I know I possess no right to ask, Darren said desperately. But please grant me a chance to truly know you now. Not the girl I dismissed, but the woman you have rigorously become. Elara studied him for a long moment. If you genuinely desire to know me, Darren, then demonstrate it through sustained actions, not eloquent words. Prove that you have profoundly changed, not because I have returned, but because you genuinely transformed during my absence. How, Darren questioned the word raw and vulnerable. How does one definitively prove that? That Your Grace is a question entirely for you to determine, Elara said quietly. I will not provide a roadmap for your ultimate redemption. The French restaurant Marquise Etienne Duclos selected was everything London society pretended to be but rarely achieved. It was genuinely elegant rather than merely ostentatiously decorated with intimate lighting that encouraged thoughtful conversation. Rather than gaudy display, crystal wine glasses gleamed softly. The rich scent of excellent Bordeaux mingled with delicate herbs and butter. Elara found herself relaxing, for the first time since her arrival in London, a welcome respite from the tension of Somerset House. Tell me precisely about your pedagogical methods, Etienne said, leaning forward with genuine, focused interest. The article in the Glasgow Herald mentioned your utilization of unconventional approaches. I teach arithmetic through practical household and estate accounting, giving them tangible skills, Elara explained. I want my students to think, not simply perform routine domestic tasks. We analyze Malthusian theory alongside basic economics. Rousseau would certainly approve, Etienne said, then smiled, though perhaps not his outdated views on women's education specifically. You are clearly far more aligned with Wollstonecraft and Mill. For the next hour, they discussed philosophical frameworks, educational theory, and the revolutionary potential of widespread female literacy. Etienne quoted Mill and Kant, debated the merits of various pedagogical approaches, and treated Elara's ideas with the palpable seriousness they unequivocally deserved. This, Elara recognized with profound certainty, was what true intellectual partnership felt like, not veiled condescension, but genuine exchange between absolute equals. The Kensington Gallery has formally consented to host your Unseen Ascendancy series, Etienne announced over the main course. A prestigious month-long exhibition commencing in a mere week if you will grant your final consent. London absolutely needs to witness what you have created. My work was never intended for London's judgment, Elara said, setting down her fork. It was created for the women I painted to honor their silent, profound worth. Precisely why London must see it, Etienne insisted, his gaze intense. This city venerates conformity, wealth that dazzles. Your paintings honor worth that society willfully overlooks. That is profoundly revolutionary, Elara. That is necessary. The use of her given name felt entirely natural and unforced. Over dessert, his expression grew serious. Lady Elara, I have not been entirely forthcoming regarding my circumstances. Elara's heart sank slightly. Here it comes. The complication that will inevitably shatter this perfect evening. I am not merely an art dealer, Etienne continued. I am Comte Laurent Dumont, Marquis Duclos. My family holds considerable estates in France and significant inherited wealth. I concealed my title initially because I wanted your honest assessment of my ideas, not my position. Elara stared at him. You are a Marquis? I am, he confirmed. And I am revealing myself now because I am about to offer a proposal that necessitates complete honesty between us. Come to France, he pleaded, reaching across the table, not quite touching her hand. Not as my mere guest, but as my official partner in creating a network of schools, in establishing galleries for overlooked artists, in building something genuinely meaningful together. He paused, his brown eyes steady on hers. And if over time we find we suit each other, perhaps as my wife. But even if not, I offer you an enduring partnership, an unwavering respect. The proposal hung suspended between them. Everything, Darren, was not straightforward, safe value. But also Elara could not help but But notice everything Darren was titled wealthy offering to transform her life. With his immense resources and social position, I offer you respect, Elara. Uncomplicated, genuine respect, Edie Hen. Summarized gently. No tortured history, no redemption arcs. Simply two intellectual equals building something worthwhile together. The trapped Lady Isolde was conspicuously waiting when Elara returned to Somerset House, her expression deceptively warm. You are looking quite flushed, my dear. Did you enjoy our pleasant evening? Isolde purred. It was pleasant, Elara confirmed. I am so. Isolde's smile was saccharine. I have taken the liberty of organizing a small intimate gathering tomorrow afternoon. Just a few close friends. I thought it might be a necessary formality to properly reintroduce you to society. I appreciate the thought, but I am not interested in, oh, but I have already dispatched the invitations. Isolde interrupted smoothly. It would prove impossibly awkward to cancel now. Besides, her eyes glittered with unconcealed malice. The Earl Darren Sterling specifically accepted my invitation. Alara's spine instantly stiffened. You invited the Earl? He has been so profoundly generous to your little academy, Isolde rationalized. It would be unforgivably rude to exclude him. 3 hours 00 minutes tomorrow. Do wear something suitably appropriate. She swept from the room, leaving Elara with the chilling certainty that she had been ruthlessly maneuvered into a trap. Across London, Darren Sterling spent a sleepless, tortured night at his desk. If Elara demanded actions, rather than eloquent words, he would provide them. By dawn, he drafted 3 documents that would irrevocably alter his relationship with London society. The first was our letter to the Times, intended for immediate public circulation. I write to publicly endorse the Solstice Academy for Women in the Isle of Skye, under the pioneering direction of Lady Elara Vane. Her innovative educational methods demonstrate what can be accomplished when we invest in the intellectual development of all citizens, regardless of gender or class. I call upon my fellow lords to support similar initiatives across the entire kingdom. The second was a series of letters to his parliamentary allies, utilizing his political influence to propose legislation supporting female literacy programs. The third was fiercely personal, a decision to attend Isolde's gathering and publicly demonstrate his changed perspective before the very society that had watched him dismiss Elara. You are playing with fire, Darren, Lord Henry warned, when Darren explained his plans over breakfast. Society does not forgive men who fundamentally contradict their previous public positions. Then let them condemn me, Darren said, quietly, his gaze steady. I have spent 7 years being precisely what they expected. It has gained me nothing but hollowness. The tribunal, the afternoon gathering at Somerset House, assembled like a formal tribunal. 20 carefully selected guests crowded the drawing room, all members of the elite circle that had witnessed Elara's original devastating humiliation. Lady Thornbury and Cecilia claimed the best seats. Conspicuously near the fireplace stood the formidable Earl Darren Sterling. When Elara descended the stairs dressed in a gown of deep amber silk, every eye turned. The whispers began immediately. Isolde, playing the doting stepmother with theatrical perfection, initiated the setup. My dear stepdaughter, who has accomplished so much in the Highlands, we are all simply fascinated by your little educational project. How utterly charitable of you to spend your time with fishermen's daughters. Yet, Isolde continued, her voice heavy with calculated innocence. We have all been intensely fascinated by the Earl of Sterling's sudden, surprising interest in women's education. Such a startling passion for our man, who once said now. What was it exactly? Before Isolde could finish her venomous sentence, Elara spoke clearly, her voice cutting through the expectant silence. The Duke said that he danced with ladies, who enhanced his reputation, not diminished it. He said this about me 7 years ago in our room, much like this one. Shocked silence descended instantly. Many of you were present, Elara continued, her voice entirely steady. Some of you laughed. All of you remembered it enough to gossip about it for months afterward. So let us dispense with the pretense that we are discussing ancient forgotten history. Darren stood, drawing every eye. Lady Elara is unequivocally correct. I said those words, and I was wrong, catastrophically, shamefully wrong. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. I stood in a ballroom 7 years ago, Darren continued, his voice carrying the immense weight of genuine remorse, and I dismissed a kind, intelligent woman because I was too shallow to see past society's arbitrary standards of beauty. Too proud to risk my reputation by acknowledging worth that did not announce itself with fashionable gowns. I watched her be publicly humiliated and banished, and I did absolutely nothing. He turned to face Elara directly. Lady Elara has constructed academies, educated hundreds of women, created art that honors human dignity. I have merely maintained estates and attended hollow parties. She spent 7 years becoming someone worthy of profound admiration. I have spent 7 years regretting that I failed to be someone worthy of her regard. The silence stretched. Then Lord Henry began to clap slowly, then with genuine enthusiasm. Darren speaks truth, we were all cruel. Lady Elara deserved better than our contempt. The unveiling Lady Isolde, witnessing her meticulously orchestrated humiliation transforming into Darren's complete redemption, unleashed her final venom. How touching, your grace. But one wonders if your sudden conscience is motivated by genuine remorse or by the fact that my stepdaughter has attracted the attention of a French marquis. Perhaps you are less interested in making genuine amends and more interested in preventing competition. To Elara's own surprise, she found herself defending Darren. His grace's motives are his own, Lady Isolde. But his actions funding educational initiatives, advocating publicly for women's opportunities, speak more clearly than idle speculation. From the corner off the room, a tremulous voice interrupted. Lady Isolde, perhaps we should discuss why you were so eager to banish Lady Elara 7 years ago. All eyes turned to Miss Henrietta Walsh, Lady Thornbury's pale companion, who looked terrified but determined. I was employed in the Somerset household 7 years ago. Henrietta continued, her voice growing stronger. I overheard conversations between you and Lord Ashford, the affair you were conducting. You feared Lady Elara might innocently reveal something, so you orchestrated her exile. Isolde's composure instantly cracked. The room instantly turned on Isolde like a pack sensing blood. Within 20 minutes, every guest had departed, distancing themselves from Isolde's toxic reputation with ruthless social efficiency. Only Darren and Elara remained. I did not want this exposure, Elara said quietly, sinking into a chair. I did not return to London seeking revenge. Perhaps justice finds its own path, Darren offered. Alara looked at him with tired eyes. Was I sold correct? Are you motivated by competition with the Marquise? Darren moved to sit across from her. Jealousy? Yes, but that is not why I spoke today. I spoke because I have been a coward for 7 years, and I am attempting, perhaps failing, but attempting to be better. I do not want to lose our second chance with the only woman who has ever commanded my absolute respect. The final condition I know I possess. No right to ask, Darren pleaded desperately. But please grant me our chance to truly know you now. If you want to know me, Darren, then continue to demonstrate it through sustained action. Prove that you have genuinely transformed during my absence. Knock interrupted. Messenger handed Alara a note. The Kensington Gallery exhibition opens in 3 days. Laurent has finalized every detail. Will you agree to the exhibition, Darren asked. Let me attend, Darren said suddenly, not as a suitor, but as someone who merely supports your work. You are under no obligation to acknowledge me, speak to me, or even notice my presence. If you attend, Alara said, remember that the exhibition is not about you. It is about the women I painted, the work I have constructed. That evening, Alara stood at her window, observing London's lights. 2 paths lay open. Darren offered the complexity of redemption, a profound risk. Laurent offered uncomplicated respect, safe partnership, and the opportunity to expand her work to France. But even as she pondered the safe choice, her mind returned to Darren's raw public vulnerability. London had become unexpectedly complicated. The future offered more choices than she had ever anticipated. 3 days later, the Kensington Gallery had been profoundly transformed. The walls were draped in deep indigo fabric that made Alara's paintings luminous against the backdrop. Each portrait was lit to perfection. 20 works comprised the Unseen Ascendancy series, fishwives with weathered faces and eyes that held immense kindness. Teachers with ink-stained fingers and patient smiles. Students whose raw hunger for knowledge radiated from the canvas. Each woman was painted with profound dignity, capturing a strength that society habitually overlooked. But in the gallery's place of paramount honor commanding attention, the very instant one entered hung the quiet girl. Alara's self-portrait from 7 years ago arrested the eye with its raw, painful vulnerability. The girl in faded muslin stood isolated at a ball, her gray blue eyes holding quiet, undeniable sadness, but also unmistakable dignity. Alara had painted her younger self with such tenderness, such compassion, that she became heartbreakingly beautiful. Not despite her pain, but encompassing its truth. It is flawless, my dear Marquise, Ediane Duclos said, standing beside Alara as guests began to arrive. Everything is perfect. Alara wore deep indigo silk that matched the walls, simple and elegant. Her hair, arranged loosely, but her hands trembled slightly as London's elite filtered through the gallery doors. What if they utterly despise it, she whispered. Then they are fools, Ediane replied firmly. And their diminished opinion will not matter. But it would matter, Alara knew. Not because she required their validation, but because their reaction would reveal whether anything had truly shifted in 7 years. In them and her, in the rigid world they both inhabited, the turnout was immense. The scandal surrounding Lady Isolde had ironically increased interest in Alara tenfold. Everyone sought to see the woman at the center of society's latest drama. Lord Henry arrived with his wife, greeting Alara with genuine warmth. Cecilia Thornbury appeared without her mother, her expression uncertain but intensely curious. And conspicuously near the back of the gallery, the Earl, Darren of Stirling, stood alone. Darren had dressed impeccably but without ostentation, his attire speaking of restraint rather than display. He positioned himself where he could observe, without imposing, keeping his promise not to intrude on Alara's night. But his eyes found her immediately and did not waver. Ediane moved to the center of the gallery and raised his hand for attention. Art reveals what society willfully obscures, he began, his accented English lending weight to his words. Lady Alara Vane has created portraits that compel us to see worth habitually overlooked. These works are not merely technically accomplished, they are morally necessary. He gestured toward the paintings. They insist that beauty and value exist beyond ballrooms and mere fashion. I present to you not just a gifted artist, but a visionary. Lady Alara Vane. Applause rippled through the gallery as Alara moved forward, her heart pounding. I am not accustomed to public oration, she began, her voice steadier than she felt, and I am certainly not accustomed to having London's attention directed toward me with anything other than a profound dismissal. A few uncomfortable shifts in the crowd confirmed her truth. These portraits are of women I have had the privilege to know in the Highlands, she continued. Women who taught me that worth is not assigned by others, it is inherent. It exists whether or not anyone chooses to acknowledge it. She paused, gathering the profound courage for what came next. 7 years ago, I was told I was utterly plain, forgettable, unsuited for notice. Those words nearly destroyed me, but they also freed me to discover what I valued in myself, independent of society's fickle judgment. Her eyes swept across the assembly. I hope these paintings make you intensely uncomfortable. I hope they force you to question who you see and who you overlook. I hope they remind you that dismissing someone says more about your limited vision than their limited worth. The silence that followed was profound. Then Cecilia Thornbury began to clap slowly. Others joined the applause building until it filled the gallery. Cecilia approached Alara during a quiet moment. I was cruel to you, she confessed without preamble. I am deeply sorry. Your work is simply extraordinary. Thank you, Cecilia. That means more than you might realize. I think I was profoundly jealous, Cecilia admitted. You possess something I did not, conviction. Purpose. I have spent my entire life being merely ornamental. You have spent yours being deeply meaningful. Across the gallery, Darren stood before the quiet girl, utterly transfixed. He saw her now, truly saw her. The girl in lilac standing isolated, her expression holding quiet dignity despite palpable pain. He was the one who had been blind. You painted yourself with such tenderness, a quiet voice said beside him. Alara had approached silently. I had to, Alara replied softly. No one else did. I did. The words escaped Darren before he could stop them. I see it now. I saw it then, if I am honest. But I was too afraid to acknowledge its truth. Why afraid? Alara asked, turning to look at him fully. Because if I admitted I saw worth in someone's society, dismissed, I would have been forced to question every other fragile assumption I built my life upon. It was easier to be cruel than to be fundamentally honest. Before Alara could respond, Etienne appeared, his hand resting at the small off Alara's back. You are being fiercely monopolized, my dear. Several patrons wished to discuss commissioning work. The contrast was stark. Etienne open and solicitous. Darren tortured and uncertain. Midway through the evening, Etienne drew Alara into a secluded corner. The exhibition is a triumph, he said, his brown eyes warm. London sees your talent, Alara. But this city will always be intensely complicated for you. Too much history. Too much pain. He took her hand gently. Come to France with me. We will establish academies together. You can paint, teach, and build something entirely yours, without the immense weight of painful memories. He paused, his voice dropping lower. And if in time you find you can trust me, perhaps even love me, I would be honored. But even if not, I offer you an absolute partnership and respect. Alara's mind raced. The offer was generous, safe, and true. Across the gallery, Darren saw the intimate conversation. Panic seized him. If she departed for France, he would lose any final chance off, proving he had changed. In a breach of all established social protocol, Darren moved to the center of the gallery and raised his voice. If I might have everyone's attention, please. Conversations instantly halted. Every eye turned to the Earl, who looked uncharacteristically disheveled, emotional, rather than composed, vulnerable, rather than controlled. I want to publicly acknowledge something that should have been said 7 years ago. Darren began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine, profound remorse. Lady Alara Vane is one of the most remarkable people I have ever encountered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I dismissed her once because I was shallow, proud, and completely blind to anything that did not conform to my narrow expectations. I have spent 7 years trying to make amends from a distance, because I was too cowardly to face her directly. His eyes found Alara's across the room. I funded her academy, not out of guilt, though. I possess abundant guilt, but out of genuine belief in her vision. I have watched from afar as she accomplished more genuine good than I have managed in my entire privileged life. He turned to face Alara directly. Alara, I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to choose me over a man who has been nothing but respectful and worthy. I am simply asking you to know that you changed me. Not by returning to London, but by existing in the world. As someone I failed so completely. The silence stretched. Then Lord Henry began to applaud. Others joined. Alara, standing in the center of the attention, walked through the silent gallery, until she stood directly before Darren. Darren Blackwell, she said clearly, you have made a true spectacle of yourself, but perhaps you needed to. Perhaps we both needed this for you to be vulnerable, and for me to witness its truth. She took a breath. You hurt me terribly 7 years ago. That pain was real and profound, and it changed the entire course of my life. But I cannot entirely regret it. If you had been kind that night, I might have married you, a girl desperate for approval. I would have been miserable, and you would have remained exactly as you were. Understanding dawned in Darren's eyes. These 7 years forced both of us to become people we were not, Alara said. You learned to question your assumptions. I learned to value my worth independent of anyone's validation. She turned toward the space where Etienne had stood. Etienne offered me respect, opportunity, genuine partnership. These are precious gifts. But Alara said, looking back at Darren, if I departed for France with him now, I would be running again. Not from cruelty this time, but from complexity, from unfinished business. Darren's face crumpled. I know I have no right to ask, but I do not know if I can love you, Darren. Too much history exists between us. I know, he whispered. But I am willing to discover if we can build something entirely new. We begin as acquaintances, becoming friends, Alara stated. You prove, through sustained action, not grand gestures, but daily choices, that you have genuinely transformed, and I remain absolutely autonomous. My academy, my work, my life remain mine. I want nothing less, Darren said fervently. I want to know you as you actually are, and if I am profoundly fortunate to earn your partnership. Alara extended her hand. Then let us begin again, Earl Darren off Sterling. He took it carefully as if she might shatter. Around them, applause erupted, genuine, this time celebrating, not scandal, but a profound possibility. 3 months later, on a cold December afternoon in the Highlands, snow fell softly over Dunbrach Keep's garden. Alara stood among the winter roses, hardy blooms that refused to surrender to the cold, and watched Darren approach along the cliff path. He came to Skye every fortnight now. He participated in the academy's work. He taught advanced mathematics to the students, helped repair the building, and treated the local women with the same respect. He showed duchesses. He had become slowly and through sustained action someone profoundly worth knowing. You are early, Alara said as he reached her. I could not stay away. Darren's smile was tentative. I wanted to see you. They walked along the cliffs, discussing the political treatise. She had lent him, arguing about economic policy, slowly learning each other's minds and hearts. Finally, as snow dusted their shoulders, Alara stopped and turned to face him. I think I might be falling in love with you, she said. Not the proud Earl, but Darren, the man who had spent months proving his fundamental character through action. I have been in love with you since I saw you in Hatchard's bookshop, and realized the woman I dismissed was entirely extraordinary, Darren confessed. But I am more deeply in love with you, now knowing you fully. He pulled legal papers from his coat. I have something for you. Not a ring, not yet. But this. Alara examined the documents establishing a joint trust for educational initiatives across the nation, funded equally by both of them, guaranteeing her complete managerial autonomy. Marry me, Alara, Darren said quietly. Not because I am a duke or because you were once dismissed. Marry me because we can build something meaningful together. Because your mind challenges mine. Because I want to spend my life proving worthy of your partnership. Alara looked up from the paper, snow catching in her hair. Yes, she said. On the explicit condition that we are equals in all things, property, decisions, life. I would expect nothing less, he confirmed. Their kiss was tender, respectful, full of profound promise. The wedding, held in the small local church 3 months later, was attended by fishermen students and a few devoted friends. Years later, when people inquired about her extraordinary life, Alara would smile and say they said I was plain, forgettable, unsuited for notice. They were wrong. But their profound wrongness freed me to discover what I was always meant to be. Not a woman defined by society's fleeting gaze, but a woman who chose herself again and again until someone fine finally saw what had always been there. And Alistair, overhearing, would add quietly, I thought I knew what beauty was. I was catastrophically wrong. Real beauty is courage, purpose, resilience. And I nearly missed it entirely. The story off the Earl and the scholar became a permanent legend, a testament to the revolutionary power of intellectual love, and the ultimate profound triumph of the self-chosen truth.